There is a specific kind of exhaustion that has absolutely nothing to do with how many hours you slept last night. It is a fatigue that sits deeper than the muscle. It lives in the space between your ribs, in the quiet hum of your nervous system when the day is over and the performance has ended. It is the exhaustion of carrying a version of yourself that you have secretly, silently outgrown. You feel it most acutely not in the moments of obvious crisis, but in the moments of hollow victory. When you achieve the thing you said you wanted, and the satisfaction evaporates before you can even close the tab or hang up the phone. You are left standing there, holding a trophy that suddenly feels like it belongs to a stranger. This is not a video about what you need to add to your life to become better. This is an excavation. This is a removal of debris. This is about the invisible weight you were never meant to carry this far. The psychological armor that is rusted shut around your potential. Stay with me for the next 30 minutes. Because the first thing we need to look at is not a flaw in your character, but a strategy in your unconscious that is working against your own evolution. Human beings are perhaps the only creatures on this planet who can be physically free while living in a maximum security prison of their own design. We are master curators of our own internal museums. We walk through the bright, airy halls of our conscious mind, admiring the exhibits we have carefully labeled and lit. Look, there is the hard worker wing. Over there is the good partner gallery. We polish these exhibits daily, hoping visitors will be impressed. But behind the velvet ropes, down a narrow, unlit staircase, there is a basement archive. The door is heavy, and the hinges are stiff because we never open it willingly. Inside that basement are the crates. They are dusty, sealed with the brittle tape of time. Inside those crates are the old operating systems, the survival blueprints written in crayon by a younger mind, who was just trying to navigate a world that felt far too big and far too loud. Carl Jung, in his exploration of the collective and personal unconscious, pointed to a truth that is both liberating in its honesty and terrifying in its implications. The psyche is not a blank slate. It is not a new computer waiting for software. It is an ancient deep ocean of inherited patterns, personal sediment, and forgotten shipwrecks. You wake up every morning and assume you are the captain of a modern vessel, steering toward a new horizon. But more often than not, you are just a lookout in the crow's nest, dutifully reporting what the current, a current formed by a storm that happened 20, maybe 30 years ago, has already decided your direction will be. You look at the map of your life and see stagnation. You see the same arguments, the same financial ceilings, the same emotional loop. And you try to push harder. You buy the journals. You set the alarms for 5:00 a.m. You scream at the sails to catch the wind. And yet, the needle on the compass spins wildly and points right back to where you started. Why? Because the unconscious mind has a single, non-negotiable, primal mandate: maintain the equilibrium of the known. Even if that equilibrium is a low-grade, chronic misery. Even if that equilibrium is the quiet desperation of a life half-lived. To the oldest, most reptilian part of your brain, the familiar is the only true safety there is. Change, no matter how positive, is a threat to the ecosystem of the self. This is the reason why we can spend decades treading water in the middle of a vast ocean and convince ourselves we are swimming toward shore. Today, we are going to stop polishing the museum floor. We are going down into the basement. We are going to look at 10 specific crates, 10 heavy psychological anchors that you must identify, acknowledge, and cut loose if you want to feel the actual wind in your actual sails. 1. The armor of a war you are no longer fighting. There exists within the psyche a frozen snapshot of you. This is not the you who reads these words now, with the benefit of hindsight and the wear of experience. This is a version forged in a specific, often forgotten fire. Perhaps it was a childhood home, where the only way to keep the peace was to become invisible and quiet. Perhaps it was a first job, where being ruthlessly aggressive was the only way to prevent being eaten alive by the corporate machinery. That version of you was a tactical genius. It engineered a strategy that ensured your survival. It got you here, to this exact chair, to this exact moment. But here is the uncomfortable, almost blasphemous truth that the self-help industry rarely touches. Survival strategies do not know how to retire. They are not designed for peacetime. They must be fired by an act of conscious will. Imagine wearing a heavy wool coat. It's thick, it's scratchy, it smells faintly of damp earth and old smoke. But for 10 brutal winters, it was the only barrier between your skin and the freezing wind. It saved your life. Now, you have moved. You are in a climate-controlled room. A different season entirely. The sun is warm through the window. But you refuse, absolutely refuse, to take off the coat. You're sweating through your shirt. Your movements are restricted and clumsy. You watch others moving with fluid grace and ease, and a dark thought creeps into your mind. They must just be inherently stronger than me. They must have something I lack. They are not stronger. They are just not wearing a winter coat in the middle of summer. They have allowed themselves to adapt to the new climate. You have mistaken the weight of the armor for the density of your own bones. You have mistaken the restriction of the coat for the shape of your own body. This is the most subtle and pervasive form of self-imprisonment known to psychology. You look at your behavior and you think, this is just my personality. I'm just an overthinker. It's in my nature. I'm just not good with intimacy. That's just how I'm wired. I'm a workaholic, I can't help it. No, that is not an immutable identity. That is a tactical report from a battle that ended years ago, still echoing in an empty bunker. You are carrying a ghost's luggage through the airport of your present life, paying exorbitant, overweight fees, and wondering why the journey is so exhausting. The past does not need you to be its pallbearer anymore. It is time to hold a funeral for the strategy that saved you, thank it for its service, and then walk away from the grave. Put the armor down. The war is over. You won. Now, you have to learn how to live with the peace. 2. The quiet sabotage of the threshold, the fear of the unknown good. Have you ever observed the precise timing of the panic attack? It is almost never when you are deep in the mud, actively drowning in a problem. When you are in the thick of it, there is a grim, adrenaline-fueled clarity. No, the panic hits at a very specific, very telling moment. It hits the moment you see the ladder out of the hole. It arrives the second the door to the next chapter actually creaks open just a few inches, and a sliver of unfamiliar light cuts across the floor. We call this phenomenon self-sabotage, but that term is far too clinical. It lacks the tragic, almost operatic poetry of what is actually unfolding in the deep waters of the unconscious. You are not a masochist. You are not trying to intentionally hurt your future self. You are trying, with every fiber of your being, to protect the only blueprint of home your nervous system has ever memorized. Jung spoke extensively about the tension of the opposites. You have one foot planted firmly in the boat, the familiar vessel of your current reality. You have the other foot stretching out, hovering over the dock of who you might become. You want to go. You desperately want to step onto that new shore. But the moment you start to shift your weight, you look down and see the gap. That dark, churning water between the boat and the dock. That space of the unknown feels like annihilation. It feels like death. So, what does the brilliant protective unconscious do? It slams the emergency brake. But it cannot do this overtly, because your conscious mind would override a simple stop. So it becomes subtle. It creates friction. You start a stupid argument with the one person who actually believes in your potential. You develop a mysterious, debilitating migraine exactly 1 hour before the big presentation. You open your laptop to write and find yourself, 3 hours later, deep in a rabbit hole of celebrity gossip you don't even care about. These are not moral failings or evidence of laziness. These are the psychological equivalent of a vehicle's traction control system kicking in when it detects ice. Your unconscious is screaming, "Unknown terrain detected. Abort. Return to the known ditch." It would rather you crash slowly into a familiar wall than speed toward an unfamiliar horizon. Because the familiar wall is at least predictable. The horizon is a question mark. And to the child within, a question mark is indistinguishable from a predator. But ask yourself, who would you be if you weren't bracing for the crash? What vast reserves of energy would suddenly become available to you if you weren't using 90% of your life force just to hold that door shut against the light? 3. The parasitic nature of unspoken relational contracts. Let us turn our gaze outward, to the ecosystem of people that surround you. Not the obvious enemies, not the loud, venomous critics who announce themselves with fanfare. Those are easy to identify and, eventually, easier to cut off. I am talking about the relationships that feel fine. They are the rooms you walk into where within the first 60 seconds, you unconsciously begin to edit yourself. You shrink your vocabulary. You lower the wattage of your ambitions. You soften the sharp, interesting edges of your personality just to ensure the atmospheric pressure in the room doesn't change. You do this so automatically that you don't even notice the sigh of relief your body gives when you leave. This is the psychological drain of the unspoken contract. It is a silent agreement, drafted in the ink of childhood patterns, and signed with the blood of obligation. You have agreed, without anyone ever asking out loud, to be the listener so they can remain the talker. You have agreed to be the stable one so they can safely be the chaotic one. You have agreed to be the audience so they can be the star. And on the surface, it looks like harmony. It looks like a long-term friendship or partnership. But beneath the surface, there is a dark and exacting mathematics taking place. You are paying a silent, energetic tax every single time you interact. You are handing over a piece of your vitality, your life force, as a down payment on their comfort. You leave the lunch feeling physically full of food, but spiritually starving. You leave the phone call feeling like you need a nap, not because the topic was heavy, but because the exchange was profoundly lopsided. Jung understood that relationships are not just the exchange of words and ideas. They are the collision of two unconscious fields, two magnetic forces meeting. And some fields are fertile, life-giving soil. Others are barren, scorched earth. They don't generate life. They just need it from you to survive. The hardest part of this pattern isn't identifying the draining person. The hardest part is admitting to yourself that you stay, because the role is familiar. You know the lines to this play by heart. You've been playing this part since you were a child. Stepping off this stage means stepping into the terrifying, silent, open space of not knowing who you are in relation to people who don't need you to be small. But that terrifying open space, that is the only place where a human being can finally, fully stand up straight without hitting their head on the ceiling of someone else's need. 4. The insatiable appetite of the polished mirror. We are taught from a very young age to want approval. It is a natural, mammalian desire. We are pack animals. To be cast out of the pack is to die. But for many, this desire mutates. It stops being a simple want and becomes a vital organ. It becomes a lung. Without the constant influx of external validation, you feel like you are suffocating. You cannot breathe unless someone else tells you the air is safe. This is the realm of the persona, the social mask that Jung described as our necessary interface with the outer world. The problem is not wearing a mask. We all wear different hats for different rooms. And this is a sign of social intelligence, not pathology. The problem arises when the mask fuses to the skin, when the adhesive is so strong that you can no longer tell where the performance ends and the raw, unvarnished self begins. You find yourself laughing at jokes you don't find funny, not out of politeness, but because the silence of not laughing feels like social death. You find yourself accepting work that is intellectually beneath you, not out of necessity, but because the fear of being perceived as difficult or ungrateful outweighs the entire value of your own finite time on this earth. You become a weather vane for other people's internal storms. If they are sunny and approving, you are worthy of existence. If they are cold and distant, you crumble into a state of worthlessness. You are handing the master key to your own internal house, to people who don't even know they have it. And then, in a tragic twist of fate, you stand outside in the freezing rain, knocking desperately on your own front door, waiting for someone else to let you in. The shift happens not when you become arrogant or narcissistic. It happens when you become discerning. It happens when you develop the taste to know that applause from the wrong audience is just noise pollution. It happens when you can sit alone in a room, in the presence of your own flawed, unpolished, unfinished self, and say quietly to the silence, "This is enough for tonight." I don't need a standing ovation to close my eyes and rest. That is the beginning of sovereignty. That is the moment you stop renting out space in your soul and finally take ownership of the deed. 5. The tyranny of the map over the living territory. There is a specific, insidious form of paralysis that has managed to disguise itself as the highest form of wisdom. It's the voice in your head that sounds so reasonable, so prudent, so adult. It says, "I just need to plan a little more. I just need to know exactly how steps 4 through 10 are going to go before I commit to step 1. I just need a guarantee." This is the illusion of control. It feels like prudence. It feels like responsibility. But when you examine it under the harsh light of psychological inquiry, it reveals itself to be a profound fear of the messy, unpredictable, and inherently uncontrollable nature of being a living organism. You want the guarantee. You want the map with the X clearly marked in red ink and the legend perfectly detailed. But life is not a cartographer's sterile drawing. Life is a river. It is a living, breathing, changing system. You cannot possibly know the exact shape and ferocity of the rapids by standing on the shore with binoculars. You can only know the water by stepping into it. The attachment to control is a direct, reflexive response to deep-seated anxiety. You think, if I can predict everything, I can prevent the pain of surprise. But this is a faulty algorithm that leads to system failure. By trying to prevent the temporary, manageable pain of a mistake, you are guaranteeing the slow, chronic, and often fatal pain of total stagnation. You are trading the small, colorful bruises of a life in motion for the deep, gray, aching atrophy of standing perfectly still. What if you stopped needing to know the 10th step? What if you just trusted that the version of you who takes the first step with open eyes will have grown wise enough, strong enough, and resourceful enough to figure out the second step when they actually arrive at that point in the journey? The relentless pursuit of absolute certainty is the sworn enemy of actually living. You are not a machine that requires perfect programming before it can operate. You are an organic entity that learns through friction, adaptation, and movement. The need to control is the need to be God over your tiny patch of existence. But you are not God. You are a human, and the grace of being human is found precisely in the moments you cannot control. The moments where you have to improvise, trust, and discover that you are in fact far more capable than your anxious mind ever gave you credit for. 6. The heavy, compound interest of the tomorrow debt. I'll do it tomorrow. 4 words. In the English language, they weigh almost nothing. They float off the tongue like a feather. And yet, these 4 words, when stacked one on top of the other, over the course of months and years, become the single heaviest chain ever forged in the foundry of the human mind. Procrastination is almost never a time management issue. That is a surface-level diagnosis. Procrastination is an emotional regulation strategy. You are not avoiding the task. You are avoiding the feeling you have preemptively attached to the task. The feeling of confusion, the feeling of potential inadequacy, the deep existential dread that this might be the very moment you are exposed as a fraud. Jung's work points us toward the shadow here, but specifically toward the shadow of the future self. We engage in a bizarre form of psychological projection. We project our most idealized, superhuman capabilities onto the person we will be tomorrow. We think, future me is a superhero. Future me will have more energy, more clarity, more discipline than I do right now. Future me will want to do this. I'll let future me handle it. But here is the devastating, brutal, and liberating secret that the universe keeps. Future me does not exist. There is no separate, upgraded entity waiting to take over. There is only current me, just older, just tireder, and just as likely to want to scroll through a screen as you are right now. Every single time you defer an action to tomorrow, you are not just losing a day. You are teaching your subconscious that the person speaking internally, you, is fundamentally untrustworthy. You are creating a long, unbroken record of broken promises within the courtroom of your own soul. And after a while, a terrible thing happens. You stop listening to yourself. Why would you? You've heard the promises before. They are empty. Your own internal word becomes worthless currency. Breaking this loop does not require a Herculean effort or a grand gesture of change. It requires a quiet rebellion against the tyranny of the perfect. It requires doing something small and ugly and finished, instead of something grand and beautiful and eternally imagined. You close the tiny, almost imperceptible gap between intention and action, and in that minuscule moment of friction, you start to weld the fractured, rusted pieces of yourself, trust back together. You become, once again, a person who does what they say they will do. 7. The cruel mirage at the summit of external success. We are a culture absolutely obsessed with the idea of arrival. We have bought into the grand illusion that there is a finish line. We think, when I get the title, when I hit that number in the bank account, when I see that number on the scale, then the rest will take care of itself. Then the noise in my head will stop. Then I will feel whole. This is perhaps the cruelest illusion on this entire list, because it keeps you running so fast, with such a singular, ferocious focus, that you don't have a single second to look down and realize you've been running a marathon on a leg that was broken miles ago. Success, in the purely external material sense, does not possess the magic power to heal the internal. It amplifies it. It acts as a massive, stadium-sized speaker system for the voice that was already whispering in your head. If you are insecure with $100 to your name, you will be absolutely terrified with $1 million. You will just have a much nicer, much higher view from the window of your prison cell. You will have swapped out the concrete floor for marble, but you are still, fundamentally, in a cage. This is the lesson of the inflated ego. You use achievements, accolades, and acquisitions as scaffolding to hold up a fragile, underdeveloped sense of self. You stack the bricks of resume and net worth high enough so that no one, least of all you, can see the empty, hollow center. But scaffolding is, by its very definition, temporary. It is meant to be taken down once the interior structure is solid. What happens to you when the project is over? What happens when the market shifts and the title disappears? What happens when the applause dies down and you find yourself alone in a hotel room that costs more per night than your first apartment, with nothing but the deafening hum of the air conditioner? The silence in that room is a kind of psychological torture, because you haven't built an interior life that can support the immense weight of the silence. You've been climbing a ladder with tremendous speed and efficiency, only to look up and realize it's been leaning against the wrong wall the entire time. The work is not to stop achieving. The work is to make absolutely sure that the person doing the achieving is someone you would actually want to sit down and have a quiet, honest dinner with. The only thing that heals the wound is turning toward it. You cannot out-earn it. You cannot out-train it. You cannot outperform it. You must, with great courage and even greater tenderness, turn and face it. 8. The unfed guest living in the basement of the psyche. Every single adult walking this earth shares their house with a child. This is not a whimsical metaphor designed to make you feel sentimental. This is neurobiological, psychological reality. The limbic system, the ancient seat of emotional memory, does not store data in neat, linear adult file folders. It stores the world in the vivid, symbolic, non-linear, and deeply immersive language of childhood. When you are triggered disproportionately, when a small piece of constructive feedback feels like a knife sliding between your ribs, or a moment of being briefly ignored in a group setting feels like the total annihilation of abandonment, you are not having an adult reaction. The child in the basement is screaming into the heating vents because the pipes in the wall just made the exact same rattling sound they made right before the big fight started 30 years ago. You cannot lock this child away. You cannot starve them out. You cannot use logic or positive thinking to adult them into silence. You can only do one thing with an inner child: neglect them. And a neglected inner child is the phantom hand that rests invisibly on the steering wheel of your entire adult life. They grab the wheel and yank it violently into the ditch of sudden defensiveness. They slam their tiny, terrified feet on the brakes of total avoidance. They do this not because they are malicious or broken, but because they are trying, with the limited tools of a 5-year-old, to navigate the complex, terrifying highways of adult life using a crayon-drawn map of a neighborhood that no longer exists. This is not your fault. You did not choose the wiring of your past, but it is, undeniably, your responsibility. The great sacred work of the second half of life is to turn around in the driver's seat and face this child. To turn and face them is not an act of indulgent weakness. It is the most profound act of adult strength and integration there is. It is to say to that younger, frightened self, I see you. I know this feels exactly like that time. I know the sound is scary, but look at my hands on the wheel. They are bigger now. Look at my feet on the pedals. They reach all the way down. Look in my eyes. I am not the scared one anymore. You don't have to drive. You never had to drive. I've got the wheel now. You can rest. This single act of internal recognition is the most profound shift in human consciousness available to us. You stop being a prisoner of war reacting to the ghosts of yesterday and start becoming a conscious participant responding to the nuanced, complex reality of today. You are no longer being pulled by unnamed wounds. You are, finally, steering. 9. The polished cage of precision, the prison of perfectionism. Perfectionism is the only profound psychological flaw that we, as a society, have learned to openly brag about in job interviews and first dates. My biggest weakness? Oh, I just care too much. I'm a total perfectionist. It's a lie. A beautiful, socially acceptable lie. Perfectionism is not a high standard. It is a primal, overwhelming fear of shame dressed up in a borrowed ball gown and expensive perfume. It is the desperate belief that if you can just make every single surface of your life flawless, you will become invulnerable. You will become smooth. You will become a polished stone that criticism cannot scratch or stick to. But this is a rigged game from the start. The house always wins. The standard is not fixed. It is on wheels. The finish line is perpetually 3 inches further than your absolute maximum jumping distance. Because the unconscious knows that if you ever actually reach the finish line, the game would be over. And then what? Then you would have to sit alone in a quiet room with yourself, without the frantic, buzzing buffer of striving. You would have to face the raw, unedited, imperfect reality of just being. And for a perfectionist, That is the scariest thing imaginable. Perfectionism has killed more art, more business ventures, and more romantic love than outright incompetence ever could. Incompetence tries and fails, which is messy, but at least it's something. Perfectionism never tries at all, because it cannot tolerate the self-image of failing. It is a massive, silent withdrawal of your chips from the table of life. When was the last time you allowed yourself the grace of being a pure beginner? When did you last create something objectively bad and share it with the world anyway, with a shrug and a laugh? That is the antidote. The willingness to be seen in the middle of the mess. That is where genuine human connection lives. People do not connect with your polished, stainless steel resume. They connect with the tremor in your voice when you admit you don't have it all figured out. They connect with the stain on your shirt and the look of tired confusion in your eyes. Stop buffing the bars of the cage. The door has been unlocked this whole time. Just walk out. 10. The story you tell yourself after the fall. Finally, we arrive at the grand, overarching fear that underpins so many of the others, the fear of failure. But as we peel back the layers of this onion, with the careful, precise knife of Jungian analysis, we find that it is never, ever about the event itself. The bankruptcy filing, the awkward breakup conversation, the missed shot at the buzzer. Those are just moments. They are just seconds ticking by on a clock. What we truly, deeply fear is the post-credits scene. It's the movie we know we will play on a loop in the private theater of our own mind, for weeks, months, or even years afterward. It's the voice that whispers, usually around 3:00 AMC. I knew it. I knew you couldn't do it. I knew you weren't good enough. You were an idiot to ever think you could leave the harbor. Get back in the boat. Stay there. Stay small. This voice is not the voice of ultimate truth. It is not the voice of God. It is the voice of a primitive, outdated protection mechanism that values stasis over growth. It is a system that would rather you live a long, safe life as a coward than risk a short, meaningful life as a hero. But this is a false binary. It is a logical fallacy of the unconscious. Most failures do not kill you. They do not even maim you. They just rearrange the furniture of your ego. They force you to sit in a different chair and look at the room from a new, slightly uncomfortable angle. Jung's perspective offers us a completely different lens through which to view the debris of our efforts. Failure is not a verdict on your immutable identity. It is data. It is neutral information. It is the natural, necessary friction that carves the riverbed deeper so it can hold more water. It is the wind that shapes the rock. You can be absolutely gutted by the result and still be deeply, quietly proud of the attempt. These two opposing emotions can exist in the same chest at the same time without tearing you apart. In fact, the ability to hold those two opposing truths is the very definition of psychological maturity. The person who never fails is a myth, a cartoon character. The person who never learns from failure is a tragedy. But the person who stops letting failure define the core essence of their worth, that person is, for the first time, free. When you stand back and look at this collection, the heavy armor, the threshold saboteur, the draining contracts, the fused mask, the feudal map, the compounding debt, the shimmering mirage, the unfed child, the polished cage, and the post-credits story, you might feel a wave of heaviness wash over you. That is an appropriate and honest response. You have been carrying these things for a very long time. They are not light. They have weight and mass and gravity. But here is the crucial, liberating distinction that changes the entire nature of the project you are undertaking. These are not character flaws. They are not evidence of your brokenness. They are strategies. They are brilliant, creative, and often ingenious solutions that a younger, more vulnerable, more resource-limited version of you came up with to survive a world that felt overwhelming and unsafe. The process of eliminating these things, as the title of this video suggests, is not a violent exorcism. You do not need to scream at them or banish them with shame. The process is a gentle, respectful, and deeply honorable retirement ceremony. You do not take the heavy armor of your past and throw it in the trash with disgust. You take it off carefully. You look at it. You see the dents and scratches that tell the story of the battles it protected you from. You hang it on the wall in a place of honor, and you tape a small note to it that reads, "Thank you. Thank you for keeping me safe in the war when I was small and the world was big. The war is over now. I am home. I am safe. You can rest. I will take it from here." You do not banish the frightened inner child. You do not lock the basement door and walk away. You sit down on the cold, dusty floor next to them. You don't say a word at first. You just sit, and you listen, with the patience of a mountain, to the story they have been trying to tell you for 3 decades. And when they are done, you do not offer advice. You simply say, "I'm so sorry that happened. I'm here now. Let's go upstairs where it's warm." This is the work of a lifetime, but it does not require a lifetime to begin. It begins in a single, quiet, conscious moment. It begins with the profound, earth-shattering realization that you are not the sum total of your past reactions. You are not the armor. You are not the fear. You are the silent, vast, and powerful awareness that observes the reaction. You are the space between the stimulus and the response. And in that sacred, pregnant space, no matter how small or fleeting it feels at first, lies your entire, undiluted freedom. You get to choose a new way. You get to set down the weight. Not because you transformed into a completely different person overnight through sheer force of will, but because you finally, mercifully recognized that the person who was carrying the weight was never the whole you. It was just the exhausted part of you that forgot how to ask for help putting the heavy bags down. There is a version of your life that is waiting for you on the other side of this letting go. It is not a fantasy life without problems. It is not a fairy tale where you are suddenly perfect, unbothered, and floating 6 inches off the ground in a state of permanent bliss. That is not the promise of psychology. The promise is far more grounded, and in its own way, far more beautiful. It is a life where the noise in your head is finally quiet enough that you can actually, truly, hear yourself think. It is a life where you can walk into a crowded room without scanning the perimeter for exits or searching the faces for signs of approval. It is a life where you are fiercely, tenderly, and irrevocably present for the only thing that has ever been real or will ever be real. This breath, right now. You came here wondering why you felt stuck. You thought the answer was a complex hidden map you needed to find. But the answer, as it always is in the deep, quiet waters of the psyche, is not something you find. It is something you release. It is something you let go of. The door has been open this whole time. You just couldn't see it because your arms were too full of old ghosts in heavy, outdated armor. Set them down. Gently. With reverence for the journey. And step through. The air is different out here. It is lighter. It smells like the future.